All right, we're live. Okay, welcome back. Um, Episode 10, we're gonna talk technique. So I don't think we'll get into anything.
Technically,
Yeah, technically, just like your social media handles. So I
All right,
think
you got me.
yeah,
I
I got you.
I just freezed out. Sorry.
Oh, I got you.
What'd you
oh,
say?
we're just complimenting you.
Yeah, we were making fun of your
Like,
social media handles
because
because we're
it's
talking
hilarious.
technique, remember? Technically.
Oh
Anyway,
yeah.
so I don't think we'll get into it's not gonna be about specifics of technique like on a lift basis, but I think we should start off by just talking, like sharing thoughts about why technique in general is important. And I think especially like today, like you see a lot of things on the internet or wherever. Um, and I mean, I think some people will say that technique doesn't matter necessarily. Like they might not believe it, but that's kind of what the perception is. So I think we should share just some thoughts on like why we think a focus on coaching technique is important, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yep.
So
Go ahead,
Nick,
Nick.
what do you think? Like I think just the principle of technique is I think how we should go about this.
Okay. Um. So the principle of tech, like I think it's very important from a safety aspect. Um, you need to teach and coach technique continuously, just so that you're handling safe, like complex and technical movements safely while you're in the weight room and teaching those and coaching those correctly. Um, and then I do think that technique lies on a continuum of kind of like anything else, where you can be really not intelligent and just say technique doesn't matter and you just push something else and then eventually something breaks. Or you can be on the other end of the spectrum where you only care about technique, but then you're not pushing enough to elicit adaptation to
Mhm.
prepare your kid for sport. So I lie kind of, I don't want to say right in the middle of that. I try to be in the middle of that so that I'm coaching technique and teaching technique so that the athletes that I'm working with are doing everything safely. But then I also want to push them so that they get the adaptation that I'm looking for. That's kind of how I look at technique. I don't want to be too far on either end of the spectrum because then I think I'm doing my athletes a disservice.
That's a really good point
Yeah, that is a good
because
point.
because you can, we kind of open this up as like not caring about technique, but it can be the other side too,
Yeah, true.
where if it's not done perfectly, you're not creating a stimulus
Mm-hmm.
great enough in order to have any type of adaptation.
Right.
Um, so you're exactly right. There has to be there is some give and take. I mean, what I was going to say is, and I tell this to my athletes as well. It's like lifting weights is a skill,
Yeah.
right? And we practice that skill the same way we practice sports skill. Um, and so we're constantly trying to, or working on our technique on every exercise, making sure we're in the correct positions and setting up correctly, and then performing the movement correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to use Olympic lifts for an example. It's like, well, we only Olympic lift for maybe 10 minutes a day, right? We're
Right.
not we're not Olympic lifters,
Right.
but we and we still, our guys still we'll train heavy. But if you walked in the room, you wouldn't say like, oh, across the board, every single one of these guys is a proficient Olympic lifter like
Right.
that, or proficient at clean, or proficient at snatch or jerk, whatever. You wouldn't say that, but we're good enough. We're good enough that we're not going to get hurt, and we're also training in a way to improve explosive strength and power. But we're constantly working on technique, and we'll take steps forward and steps backwards with regression and progression, to make sure that that we're touching those areas that we're weak at as far as technique is concerned.
Yeah, like see, like when you said, like you might spend a little bit of time working or a lot of time working technique, but you only spend a certain amount of time, like on the Olympic lifts or whatever the extra or movement might be. I think that like the good enough term, I think that is accurate. And I like, like in a lot of people say that good enough, like not good enough, whatever. But like, especially like with lifting, it's like there's a line of they're doing really bad and it's like an injury risk, or
Mhm.
like you said, Nick, you're over obsessive about it. And then, you never push them or like let them push themselves. But like the good enough term is like that is, I think, what it is. It's if you're watching a squat, obviously it's never good enough, but it's like there's like a threshold of like they're really bad and it's gonna get them hurt, so I have to keep them back. Or like, they're getting to that point where they are good enough, so let them go. Because like that, like the good enough line too. It's like once they get to like where they are getting it and it is good enough, then that added load and like a little bit more challenge, it makes them better at the lift too. Because like
Mhm.
we talked about it too. It's like if you never put weight in their hands or weight on their back, they don't have a chance to like be challenged by it and adapt to it. So like that good enough line, it's as long as things are checking out, like they're not, doing huge errors on specific lifts, it's like let them go a little bit so that the weight can start to correct them and like self correct it.
Yeah, I agree.
I just think that that term, it's like people want to say that that doesn't exist and it's like it's got to be perfect, which, is whatever, but getting them to the point where they're adequate at it and then progressing from there is a valuable thing to be able to see.
Right. I mean, and like as a coach, you have to stand for something as well.
Right.
Like if you're gonna say, hey, we're squatting knees over toes past parallel, and everybody's gonna do that. Well, if an athlete can't do that, then they need to regress or learn how to do that if that's what you're going to stand for, right? you know
Right.
um so the same thing, if I'm going to clean from the floor across the board, then we need to know how to pull from the floor, work through progressions, and then clean from the floor. I can't just have, well, he can't do it, so he's just going to go do something else, um, sort of thing. So we have to be able to teach them and coach them and have standards within that technique as well. If we're going to say you're squatting past parallel and a guy squats only to parallel or above parallel, we can't let that slide either.
Right.
We either have to take the weight down or regress the movement or fix whatever's going on. Maybe it's a foot issue, an ankle issue, a hip issue, whatever, in order to get them to do those things.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something I want to get into a little bit later too, like about the like actual oversight of it, like whatever standards you implement, making sure you're not looking the other way and like just ignoring it. Because it's easy to like I think it's easy to talk through technique and like say it's an emphasis, but it is difficult. Like, if it's 1 on 15 and everybody's squatting and or Olympic lifting or whatever it might be to really hone it in. And it's like as the coach, it's like to resist the temptation, just like see somebody doing it wrong and then kind of look the other way. Cause it's like it's not that big of a deal. But then like you said, it's like, well, as the coach and I'm the one trying to teach this and like instill it, well then I have to enforce it, like or like maybe the kid can't do it, physically can't do it, then I have to make a change. But it's like once you establish that it's important and the things you want, then you have to abide by it, if that makes sense. And that's the only way they will. Otherwise, they'll know it's not important because you're not backing up what you're saying.
Right.
Yeah. But yeah, and then I would just add to like you talked to like the continuum but it's like I think the main thing, which I think is like this is like the one of the main things that relates to sport too. It's like how you do whatever you do in the weight room is how you're going to do it on the court. It's not the exact same. Like you're obviously not doing the same things, but it's like if you approach your training in like a lackadaisical way and not don't really care about executing what your coach or strength coach wants, you're not gonna it's not like you're gonna be able to just flip it on the court. I mean, some people might, but that's a rare number, I think. It's just like
Yeah.
you have to, it's a habit, so if you're gonna approach a squat, like have your routine, do it as perfectly as you can, take the feedback, try to improve. it's a a constant with you on the court or field or whatever too. Like that's, usually that's how you're going to approach things across the board, which only helps.
Right. And I think that's the same, like kind of what I was getting at earlier too, with it's a skill. Like
Right.
we need to practice what are those skills, those weight room skills, the same way we want to, you know, practice basketball or football or baseball, whatever we're doing on the court or on the field. It's just like, to me, it's the same. I have the same mindset. Um,
Right.
and then I have the luxury of I'm only work with one team and one coaching staff. So my expectations, my standards, and the way I coach is a mirror image of how they're also being coached on the court,
Right.
right? And so it's a very high demanding environment as far as like expectations and standards, and we want to do things the right way. It's also very physical and it's very fast, and it's has a lot of pace and it's aggressive. And that's the same. We do the same thing to an extent in the weight room, with those types of skills, or the weight room skills, the lifting. It's coached and taught the same way.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like, like we started off by like, why is it important? It's like, I mean, it's like for us in there, it's like that is, technique is, like Nick talked about, the continuum. It's like that is what we do, like it's like, yeah, you're pushing them and things like that, but it's like, but if they don't have that adequate level, like you can't do your job really. So it's like the main job is making sure that they're executing correctly. And like you said, it's the same on the court. It's like it's demanding, physical, but it's like at the end of the day, it's like, can you execute? And the same in the weight room. It's like, can you, as the player, execute what they want? And then as a coach, can you teach it so that they can execute it as perfectly as you know how? You know. But I think we should go into more of that skill piece, um, and talk through that a little bit more, because I think like my old coworker, he talked about this a lot too, and he's like, like everybody makes it okay, like if they show up at basketball practice and they're really bad on day one, it's like, oh yeah, that's fine. They just need more reps. Like they just need to practice more. But then they'll go lift after and see somebody squat and they're doing terrible. And it's like, well, why go over there and fix that? So it's like, it's the same exact thing, but for some reason, like in the weight room, I don't think it's like really understood, or it's at least not accepted that, like they're not going to look great within 4 weeks. But like you said, it's a skill. So what exactly does that mean? What are you smiling at, Nick?
I was just thinking, like, so we all use like Olympic lifts, and Logan can attest to this probably 100%. It's like we went through like high school and college and trained and everything. I guarantee, like, if I asked you right now and I said, like, when was your best Olympic lift, you would say like years after you were done with college.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh
we
yeah.
performed those lifts for years and years. So like developing the skill of those movements.
Yeah, this is
like,
a good
it takes
point.
time. And you got to think about, like, if you have a collegiate basketball player, that kid's been playing basketball since he's been touching a basketball since he's like 5 or 6 years old.
So
So, like, if
15
you go
years,
into
yeah.
day one practice and they're a little rusty, like the coach can just be like, oh yeah, it's gonna come back. But then you're right, they need to kind of take that mindset to like the weight room. And if it's like week 4 in the weight room of their life, you kind of have to explain, like, this is a completely different skill, something they've never done, and they've only done it for 4 weeks. So it's kind of like you just got to understand the difference there too, because they've been playing basketball forever. So like a rusty first day, maybe that's expected. But like if you have someone who hasn't touched a barbell ever, like you can't expect them to be.
They hadn't even got to the point where it's rusty yet. Like,
Yeah, like they're still in a really big learning phase.
see,
So
so like for you personally, would you say that, like, do you think you're the best at lifting now than you've ever been? Like, do you think that your lifts are the best they are right now?
like technique wise,
Yeah, like technically, maybe not the weight, but like how you perform them.
yeah.
Yeah, so like you said, it's like you've been lifting your whole life, however long. Like let's say
Yeah.
it's 25 years or 20
It's
years.
now been like a majority of my life. So
Right. And just now you say that they're the best they've ever been. And I
Right.
feel the same way. It's like my lifts now feel way better than when I started lifting as a freshman in high school in 2006.
Mhm.
But yet we watch like, or like, we expect like a kid to walk in and be super good at it. Or
Yeah.
we wonder like why it doesn't look good. It's like, well, like, and then you add like, like you said, it's like, they might be in a freshman in college in October and it's their 5th week of lifting weights. And it's like now you add in there like transferring or like junior college routes. And it's like these kids could have like 4 different coaches in like a 3-year span. So
Mhm.
every time they go somewhere else or some coach leaves and a new one comes in or whatever, that's always an adjustment to what they want. So now like in theory, the whole process basically starts over again. So
Yeah.
now like your 25 years of where you're at now, well, then now it starts back a half a year. Like, so it's like, it's just interesting because we have a different perspective. So like we expect like, they're not going to be good for a while, but again,
Right.
it comes back to that good enough point. But
Yeah.
yeah, to think that the majority of your life has been spent lifting weights and now you think you're the best, which will continue to get better. But
Mhm.
it's interesting to think about that when you phrase it like that.
Well, and because your technique is at its best, or your weightlifting skill is currently at its highest, I bet the sheer numbers that you can of weight that you can move are close behind. Like, I mean, you're probably stronger now or just as strong now as you were in
Yeah.
college, is my guess.
Oh,
I
yeah.
mean, I hit
Yeah.
my biggest squat number, my biggest clean and jerk number in at Utah State.
Yeah.
2
You
years
I
know,
ago.
told you I
2
told
years
you guys
ago.
a few weeks ago I hit my like
Yeah,
biggest
that's
power
right.
snatch ever
That's right.
just because I had
Yeah.
been working so hard on it.
But
So
yeah, I think this is worth going because it's like, we expect like, all right, like we've been training for 3 weeks, like should be able to set new 1 rep maxes, like clean should be looking sweet. It's like this is the difficulty of it too. Like we talk about technique and stuff, and like depending on what setting you're in, it's like this is the difficulty of like this setting. It's like it's such a long-term process. Like you're talking for the 3 of us, like 10, 15, 20 years. And now like you just set a PR in a lift a month ago. Like it's just interesting when you think about how long the process does actually take and like how long it's pretended to take in some instances.
I think
Yeah.
that gets like kind of botched a little bit because when you do get those people that have never touched a weight before and you start doing stuff with them, their nervous system's going to adapt and they're going to be able
Yeah.
to do stuff
Yep.
within the first couple months that they have not previously done. And then people will
Right.
get excited and then they kind of level off and they're like, "Oh, what's happening now?" And it's just,
Right.
well, we're kind of past that honeymoon phase.
Right.
Back to your comment earlier though, like the athletes are in the weight room and they're like, why is he squatting bad? Like that comment. I mean, I don't remember if we said this before. I know we've talked about this in the past, the 3 of us, but like for whatever reason, anybody can be an expert on lifting
Yeah.
weights.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like, and it's just like, oh, I trained for, I worked out at blah 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 with blah blah blah,
Well, everyone has
and now
access. Yeah.
yes, and so now they're a self-proclaimed expert,
Right.
you know,
Right.
and so I think it's easy in our setting to like to be judgmental like that a
Right.
little bit.
Well, it's like this is like the blessing and curse of social media because like you can find a lot of good stuff on there. Like I think people put out a lot of good information, but it's like,
Yeah.
but like I find myself getting confused sometimes. Like, and if if we've been coaching for 10, 15, 20 years and we're getting confused, like that just shows like the amount of things that are out there. And like you said, it's like you can go on there and scroll through Instagram and find 50 squat videos. And then now all of a sudden, like you walk in as, Nick's coaching a team. And it's like, Coach Nick, like, why is their squat bad? This guy said it's supposed to be like this. Like, well, yeah, I know, but there's 50 million factors that go into this and it's not that easy. But yeah, but
Right.
at the same time, it's like you can find a lot of good things to use too. So it's an interesting dynamic. But like, yeah, like Logan said, it's like, like everybody's kind of an expert. So when you see like, I have like one story. I have like a couple of summers ago, I did like a high school for a little while or just helped out. And then like it was for like 100 and some kids, and like most of them haven't ever trained before. So I just wrote a program that was super simple. Like basically, I'm just trying not to get anybody hurt. And like the feedback was that it was too easy. I'm like, okay, well, like, would we rather have the alternative? Like, would it be better if I had made it way too hard and kids were crawling out of the weight room? No. So it's like it's just always there's always going to be feedback. Like
Yeah.
most of it, is what you're
Yeah.
not doing right. Like, and
Yeah.
it's
I
just,
mean, I mean, easy is easy is a perspective, and
right.
we all know, all three of us understand like motor learning and how the brain works and that stuff. Like if you want to make, you
Right.
can make something more difficult by increasing the speed, increasing the weight, changing the way you do the movement. So
Mhm.
you can tweak all those things, and that's what we do, right? I one of the Probably one of the best strength coaches in the country. Listen to them talk, and they're doing kettlebell goblet squat with
Right.
lightweight single arm overhead press with a dumbbell,
Right.
lightweight, and they're doing it for a progressive amount or several weeks. And he's like, "Well, if I can elicit adaptation down here, why would I leave?
Right.
Why would I leave from here if I'm getting an adaptation?
Right.
Sometimes you gotta know where you're going and how much time you got to get there and that sort of thing. Why go in there and max it, all those kids on a back squat?
Right.
Because I mean, yeah, sure, maybe 5 or 6 of them could do it, but the most of them might crumble, and hate weightlifting the rest of their lives. Who
Well, it's like
knows?
most of them, it's just a total waste of time. It's like, yeah, they
Yeah,
can all go do it, but it doesn't matter. Like to Nick's point again on the, like, it's like that honeymoon or novice phase. It's like you can go max those kids out on Monday on the squat, and then you can go do it again on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday, and it's going to go up most likely. And it's like, oh, they got stronger. No, they did not get stronger. Like they just did it once. They practiced a little bit again, like the repetition. And then on Wednesday or Thursday, they probably could do more. So it's like they didn't get stronger. You're just getting closer to figuring out where they actually are at to start doing some training, you know? And like you said too, it's like you talked about a good coach, and it's like they're doing real basic stuff. And then I think about like, like Dan John's easy strength program. It's like that guy's been coaching for like 50 years, and his main program that he recommends to people is 2 sets of 5 with easy weight that you never struggle with. So it's like how any like he wants the frequency to be up. So it's like you're basically just getting a lot of like low to medium weight reps, but you do it 5 days a week. He's like, you never struggle. You just focus on doing perfect reps. When it feels easy, you add weight. And it's like, I don't know of a better way to like start the training process and like get people to get reps in and do it right. And then just build on it. But yeah, like, like you said, it's like, then you see like max out videos or whatever. And it's like, what are we doing?
yeah,
I think a huge portion of that too is like ego on both the coaches
Right.
and athletes' part,
Right. Right. Right.
especially um when the athletes are male, like they want to like compete and like see what they can do and beat their teammates or like just see how much weight they can do. And then when you have coaches like who might be feeding their ego and it's like, look how much I have this kid doing
Right.
at this lift. And it's,
Right.
you know, I just think sometimes people feed their ego a little too much instead of, developing a sound plan and following that plan. Like obviously you're going to have to adjust plans, like they can never be perfect. And, as you go through it, you'll have to change some things. But if you kind of stay on course with what your plan is supposed to be and you don't overdo it or feed the ego too much, I think you'll get a better result than if you kind of just right away, kind of like you said, like max back squat or like go do all these things and over push kids or kids push themselves too much just because they want to say they did a certain amount of weight on a certain lift. So I think
Yeah.
battle to fight too.
And that's ego. That's ego, but that's also you as a coach. Like, again, what do you stand for from a technique standpoint?
Right.
Like if you preach technique for the first 3 weeks, and then week 4 and 5, you're like, all right, let's just see how much we can do. And you know what I'm saying? Like, it's
They're
not
breaking on the way up. Yeah.
It's like, but
correct.
it's like you didn't really mean what you said.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know. I think my thought process, especially with like my new guys, all my guys, like if you took one of them and pulled them, or took several of them and pulled them and asked them what I thought about technique, they would all say that I had really high value. And you guys have seen me coach,
Right.
obviously, too.
Right.
But all my new guys come in, whether you're a walk on, a 4-star transfer, it doesn't matter. And you start out on developmental 0, and we literally aren't pushing any weight whatsoever. I mean, and we're just working technique and make sure we're proficient in it. But I know I have I know I have enough time. Right. So we spend 8 weeks of that in the summer, like doing those things, and then I've got another, 6 weeks in the preseason. And don't get me wrong, we're pushing intensity as well. Like Nick said earlier, we need to elicit adaptation. I'm trying to make these guys faster and stronger and more powerful. So we're doing those things, but we're not pushing it too far. Like, we're always staying within the athlete's skill level.
Right.
And then I know when we get in season, we're going to train 4 days a week in season. So
right.
With that, like in our warm up, we're always squatting, we're always hinging, we're always pressing. And then we're, at least 2 days a week, we're doing some sort of complex, whether that's a barbell complex for the clean, or a barbell complex for the snatch, or a kettlebell or a dumbbell complex, working all those movements. So I know I've got 6 months at a low level, high frequency time frame to teach technique. So then we come back in the off season, like, our guys are better lifters because they've seen it every single day.
Right.
And we're constantly pushing those skills.
Yeah. When it's like, we talked about that continuum and like making sure we push adaptation, but it's like technique is always the underpinning value, that if technique deteriorates, there's no more loading, so it is the most important thing. It's like, and like you said, that, like, even just listening to you, like, that is the thing that you start with, and that you're concerned with, and that you're trying to base like how much time you have with. So it's like, even if like we don't feel like, our only or we don't want to be like hyper technical, but like we still all kind of are, because it is like, I think especially to us three, it's like that is the most important thing. Because it's like, even though I want to push a kid, if I see their squat form deteriorate, I'm not going to let them go.
Right. Well, so technique should be the limiting factor in every single lift, not not the load, the load. Because I know I've seen a lot of ugly cleans in my day, and I'm sure they're strong enough to do more. I'm sure they're strong enough to do more, but it was awful. Right. So it's like, no, okay, you're done. Your technique and your skill level, especially when we're talking about the Olympic lifts. I mean, everything's a skill. Squat's a skill, press it, but Olympic lifts are like a real skill.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, hell, it's a sport.
Right.
So when you're failing at that, or maybe you complete the exercise, like you complete the clean, but it was awful. Your pull was bad. Your catch was bad. Your knees touched each other. I had a kid drop to their knees and catch a clean and then stand up with it. It's like, okay, you're done. Like, like that's, you're like, yes, you got it. Good job.
Right.
Maybe you can do more, but you're done.
Yeah.
Well, and like, that's something that I always used to tell teams too. It's like, the weight should, like, if you're up in super intense, like rate limiting sets, like the weight should be what makes you fail. Like you shouldn't fail because you try to like good morning up your squat, and like, like your technique should hold constant. And when the lift fails, it's not, your technique isn't trying to manipulate the weight. The weight, if it's too heavy, it's just going to pin you and you're done, which is fine. But you don't want to use that to like struggle through it and try to manipulate around it and like maneuver the weight up and stuff, because that's how bad stuff happens. But like,
Mhm.
I wanted to go back to something Nick was talking about. So like you said, like about the numbers and things like that, like, or like the numbers versus like technique improvements, you know,
Yeah.
like I was just reading something today and they were talking about like long-term versus short-term projects and like how long-term projects are a lot harder to like quantify. So we default to like easy checklist type items. Like instead of working on like a big project at work, people will, like spend their whole day in their email because it's easier to like quantify. And I think that that relates to like what we're talking about because like the whole theme of this episode is technique. So technique is a long-term process of like refinement, but you can't, like unless you're videoing and like, or you're with the kid, like, because, my impression of someone's technique is just my view on it. But it's like there are no like markers in it really. I don't think like it's more of like an eyesight, coach's eye, like art type of thing. But
Mhm.
the numbers are the easy short-term thing. So it's like it's easy to say, okay, Jimmy Bob back squatted 185 for 2 on week 1, and then week 4 he did 225 for 5. So you see that improvement, Like it's so easy to just write, or like, oh, vertical jump was 15 inches on day 1 and then on day 30 he jumped 25. Like an unbelievable improvement. But those are the easy, like that's the low-hanging fruit, is to like market the technique numbers, because you can especially like again the technique, like when it's like, you test week 1 on the squat. Okay. Week 2, they do way better. But do you know the reps will perform with the exact technique? Like Logan talked about, like making sure the depth's correct or whatever you expect as a coach. Because if you don't keep your eye on that and don't tolerate anything other than your standard, then it's all out the window. But again, it's like the ego gets in there and you want to be able to put down on paper and share with people, for a variety of reasons, which some of them I understand. But
Mhm.
like it's way easier to try to sell that, because you can't sell technique improvements. Like nobody, like, not that nobody cares, but I don't know if anybody cares. Like who cares if, like, nobody cares? Oh, like, Nick's the best strength coach I know. Like that girl's back squat looks way better than it did a year ago. That, but I mean, it's like, to me, that is the most important thing. Like, great, that's what we
Yeah.
want, because that's setting
But
these people up for long term. But
yeah.
if someone comes to you for 8-week combine training and you say, oh, we got our back squat better, they're like, perfect. Like, I don't care, which they should, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I feel like the people that care the most are other practitioners,
Right.
in the field. When
Right.
I worked with when I worked with Dave Scholes at Utah State for, I guess it was probably only a half a year, I guess, before he went to Texas Tech. Like when those guys came in the room and started to train, like
Oh yeah. You
not
know it.
only were they pushing a ton of weight, but their technique was flawless.
Weird
And I should
correlation, by the way, too.
well, that's what I was gonna get to here. Like, I mean, not that it was flawless. Like there were guys that needed coaching, and they coached hard. Everybody coached hard, but I'd say you could almost brand Utah State strength and conditioning
Right.
in that way. And then but it trickled.
Right.
I mean, he was obviously the pillar of it all. Being there for well, I think he was there for like 10 years in total. You know,
Yeah.
and building that program, but like it trickles all the way into every other sport.
Right.
And so when I got there, it was really easy. I had the same standards.
Right.
So
Right.
it's just like, well, all right, perfect. All of our athletes already understand what the standard is,
Right.
and we went for it. But there again, like we're
It's
trying
just
to
an expectation.
coaching staffs and coaches, like they like to see, oh, they got this much stronger and so on and so forth. But
Right.
again, technique is going to be the limiting factor and also the driving force to pushing those numbers up.
Right.
And so I don't know. It has to be a staple of whatever you're doing, and if it's not, and you don't have expectations and standards, then you're limited. Your ceiling's limited.
Yeah. When it's like, I think that point that you just made, it's never been more difficult to accomplish that now, because you have like, like you have kids coming in and out of the program, sport coaches coming in and out, everybody's moving around all the time. So like that consistency throughout, it's not only not valued, but it's not happening anymore. Like that,
Correct.
like, like you said, it's like you got there and you know what you want, and then you see him like all over technique, and that's the expectation throughout the whole department, and it's like, well, this is easy, like here we go. But if you come in and every coach is doing something different and all the kids think something else is right, then it's like, oh my gosh, like this is a 2-year work in progress. Like,
right. Well, and you're exactly right with all the moving parts. I mean,
yeah,
I mean, I've never been anywhere for longer than 3 years.
right,
So I mean, I've never seen a freshman graduate
right,
that
which
I
is
started with.
crazy. It's crazy,
And now with the transfer portal and kids can just come in and out and do what they don't have unlimited transfers, but they can transfer a lot easier.
right,
Coaching staff's obviously changing as well, and then those standards adjusting. Like,
right,
you can't just turn your head on and look the other way when it
right,
comes to some of these expectations that you have in regards to technique. And if you do, like, I don't know, I've coached long enough to know that the athlete's going to find the easiest way.
right. It's human nature,
And the ones that don't, those kids are special.
right?
And
And they're rare.
And they're rare. And so you've got to preach it to the point where they know that this is the expectation and they just do it automatically.
Right. Well, it's like Mike Boyle said. He's like, we're not strength and conditioning coaches. We're coaches of human nature. Like, we're trying to fight human nature. Like, because who wants to come in and like think about the squat and try super hard to do it perfectly when they could just put their bar on the back, sit down and stand up a few times and then walk out? Like, it's way easier to just not. Like, I always think of like the chin up examples. Like, nobody does them all the way down because it's really hard. So what, as people, like, we don't want to do that, like it's just way easier to just stop 3/4 of the way down. And then it's way easier for the coach to just be like, oh, nice job, Billy. You got 50 reps. No, he didn't, but again, it's way more difficult as the player to do it correctly and the coach to, coach it correctly. It's just not, it's demanding, but I don't know. It's just the way it has to be. So
I kind of wanted to revisit. We didn't like blatantly state this or anything, but Logan kind of was talking about his NCs. Now they're going 4 days a week, and then they always have, hinge, lower body push, upper body press, pull, whatever it is. So we know this from a motor learning and skill acquisition standpoint, but I think it's kind of a good point to make is, repetition is the mother of skill, but if you're looking to acquire skills, your frequency has to be high as well. And you kind of mentioned it with the Dan John easy strength example too.
Yep.
If you're not always touching on those technique points for something that, you want to have a standard in your program, like a hinge motion or a squat motion or whatever it is, if you're not frequently touching on those techniques, like you're going to delay the acquisition of that skill even more. Right. So I just wanted to make a point of like how important it is to have the frequency high for those skills. For somebody that like doesn't know, like, maybe they do like bodybuilding splits or movement splits or something like that, where they're not doing any type of hinge on a day where they're just thinking like, oh, I'm just going to do upper body today.
Right.
And then they're just missing a whole day of anything lower body, hinge or push. And I think it's a good note to make that like the frequency of whatever you're doing kind of dictates that skill acquisition as well, not just how many reps you're doing within a session.
Yeah. When you think of, I think this is a great point. And it's like, when you think of like the people who put out like their, introductory or like novice programs, like the same in the good ones, like the same thought process applies. Like Mark Ripeto's linear. It's like, what do they do? The same thing 3 days a week. I mean, they rotate 1 or 2 exercises, but it's the same thing, alternate days. It's an A and a B workout. Same thing. You're just adding weight slowly. Like even like, like Dave Tate and like West Side System. It's the same all the time. And it's very few exercise. There's very few little variety, but you're squatting, hinging, pushing and pulling, and you're doing that every day that you lift, not, Monday through Sunday, but if you lift Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, you're going to do the same things all the time. And it's like, so, but I think it's easier to complicate things. But again, like you said, it's to get them to do it right. Like, you have to touch it all the time.
And that style and that thought process is not sexy.
No,
No.
that's
And
the
so-
problem.
And so you can fall, and don't get me wrong, I have. Like, I
Yeah.
fall into the thing where I'm doing too much or getting too complex or just trying to, like, just getting out of my, not necessarily out of my scope, but out of the athlete's scope.
Oh,
And it's
yeah.
like, all right, you got to you got to pull back, like, here, and we got to get back to what we know how to do, but that's the same thing in sports.
Right.
Like, you can get way too complicated, you can get over analytical, you can, and then all of a sudden your ability to play the sport has slowed down, and then you're less effective, and so it's the exact same thing. There's a lot of correlation
Yeah.
between training and playing the sport, and
In different ways,
It's
but
the
it's the
in
same.
different ways.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, I don't know who said this, but now I'm thinking about it. They said, like, if you want to be a good coach, you cannot get bored with doing the same things all the time. Like, it's your job, like you talked about with, like, touching the same lifts. Like, as the coach, like, how boring, not boring, but it's like, it's easy to be bored with teaching the same movements all the time if you don't really believe in them,
Mhm.
but, like, you can't, like, it's like the athlete, they might get bored with it, but as the coach, you can't get bored with it. It's like, because that's your job. And it's like, you can tell when they're getting bored, because then they start changing things, they start adding more exercises, add more variety in. It's like trying to keep it fun or whatever the reason you might be, but it's like, that's not, I mean, and again, this is hard today because I think it's easier to see, like, all these different things going on, but it's like, yeah, you just can't get bored, which is, again, done.
Less fluff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But even the athlete, like, and I do, like, training can get mundane,
Yeah. That's when it's
Mhm.
good.
but you can you better be, I guess, you better be adjusting the emphasis,
Yeah.
whether you're talking about strength, power, speed, or whatever, volume, whatever that might be, adjust the emphasis.
Mhm.
And then so that's going to change. You don't have to change the exercises, but that's going to change. I like to change warm up every single day. Where the warm up is organized and structured the exact same, but every one of them is different.
Right.
There's different movements, there's different exercises. I'm touching on at the skeleton level of it all. I'm touching on all the same things, but that's where I get them some variety, so they're not.
Right.
So the athlete isn't bored.
Right.
We're not just coming in doing the same band warm up or same dynamic warm up every single day. We're not doing that. That's where I try to spice it up, if you will.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Anything else on that end? Okay. Yeah, I think the only other thing that I had that I was thinking about is, like, we talked about this stuff, and then, like, but as the session's going on, like, even if you just look at one lift as an example of, like, the focus, it's like, as you're getting ready to squat or whatever it might be, it's like how you warm up will be how you perform the main lift. So it's like, you talked about, like, habits and stuff like that, but to kind of wrap it up, it's like, however you treat, like, I know, like, I love, like, Tommy Moffat always talked about, like, no matter what the lift is or how heavy we get, we start with the bar. And it's like the coaches are coaching the bar, so that whole program is based on technique, and it's like how you approach 0% is how you're going to lift 110%, like, whether you want to or not. It's like the skills you're building, and, like, Logan and I talked about this a while ago, but, like, using those warm-ups, and like you just talked about, it's like using the warm-ups to build technique on what you want. Like, if you just try to blow through the warm-ups to get to the main working sets, or, like, blow through warm-ups to get to what you want, it's like you're never going to be as good as you could, and it's going to bleed over to the stuff that you want, that you think matters, and you're not going to do as well.
Well, yeah, you don't walk in the basketball court and start jacking 30 footers.
Well,
Like,
you can.
you go, I do
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
because I only shoot two
Yeah.
shots a day.
But
But
see,
when
you're
you,
just screwing around. But it's like
I know,
that's the point, you know.
but I mean, like you walk in and you start underneath the hoop and you play it
Right.
off the backboard, right
Right.
hand, left hand, go to the front, go to the
Yep.
left, go to the right. Then you
Right.
move it back. Then you shoot a couple free throws. Like, like it's the same.
The same principles. Yeah.
Yes. And so, and like I train some younger kids too on the side. And they, I told one of them this summer, because every time he would do a set of bench, it was different. He's a really good squatter and a really good Olympic lifter, and he loves those movements, but he doesn't like the bench, and that's fine. Like
That's
it's
rare.
weird. It's weird, but it's fine. He doesn't like the bench, so he doesn't put as much time and effort in getting set up,
Right.
and then knowing understanding where his points of pressure are on the bench and on the floor, and then and where his arms are in relation to the bar, the bar path that he's driving up. He doesn't pay attention to those things. And I always coached him on it, but nothing ever stuck. Nothing ever stuck. So I told him exactly what I said in our conversation. Like, this is a skill. Like, it's a skill.
And the
So
mentality.
you've got to approach every set and every rep like you're trying, like you're shooting a free throw. It's the exact same thought
Right.
process. So anyway, that's my closing remark on that.
Anything else, Nick?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a good amount.
Yeah, I do too. All right. Let's wrap it up by doing what we did last week. Book recommendations, best part.
You're
Yes.
first this time because you went last time.
No.
Come on.
Okay. I think mine is Starting Strength from Ripito. And not even necessarily that's his book on like his linear progression and basically like what his whole thing is based on. And he's an interesting guy, but like I think there's a lot of good to learn from that book, and it's a book I wish I would have read earlier on, because like we talked about a lot of the stuff tonight, but like the whole principle is like basically everybody's a novice, like because nobody's gone through the process of adding weight slowly, making sure they're eating enough food, and seeing where their body can get by just super simple programming, like just basic novice linear progression where they add, like the whole program is based on 3 sets of 5 on your main lifts. Like there's only you squat, bench or overhead press, and then deadlift or power clean. And then you just add weight slowly to 3 sets of 5 of those lifts across. So 3 sets of 5 a squat, you add 5 pounds a week, you do 3 lifts a week, and then that's it. But I just think it's good to think like that, especially like if somebody brand new comes into your gym or your facility, or it's a freshman or whatever it might be, like that principle is what you want to start with, because again, like we talked about this several different times, but it's like if you try to rush it or change things too quickly, you're robbing that kid of their development, of their strength development, which again, we've talked about, like that's like the underpinning of everything. So you want to make sure you get that right for as long as it takes. So yeah, that's my recommendation.
It's a good book.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nick.
So the one I was going to say is Periodization by Tudor Bompa.
The red one?
Well, the one I have is black,
Oh.
but it's a probably newer edition.
Yeah.
What? Mine's red, 2nd edition.
Yeah. That might
I
be
think mine's newer than that. Mine's black. But I remember when like I was going through UNO with you guys, and you had mentioned that book, and when I got into like having my own teams and programming and stuff, I dove into it, and I thought it was a really good resource for developing programs for different sports based on I use it a lot for energy system development. I do recall, because he kind of had a good take on that in my eyes at that point in time, based on the different energetic needs of different sports. Obviously he covers more than just conditioning, but I kind of used it at that point in time for that a little bit more. But I thought that was a really good book in all. that covered just about anything programming I needed at that time.
Yeah, that is a good
Yeah,
book. 'Cause that's a deep dive in it. It's
Yeah,
good though.
yeah.
I
It took a
I
while.
love I love periodization because you're right.
Yeah.
Like it goes through all the sports, and then understanding energy systems and like what energy system is most important for each sport, and then
Yeah.
how some sports are very similar and how some you may have thought were similar aren't really
Right.
similar.
Right.
You know, and again, it's and it's a deep dive. It's very dense.
Yeah.
Um,
It's not easy to read. Yeah.
no, it's not easy to read. Well, I'm gonna throw out another RIP book and go practical programming.
Oh,
Okay.
So
nice.
just
That Ripato's stealing the show, man.
yeah, I know. Like practical programming was probably if it wasn't the first, it was the second training book I ever read. And it goes through again, it's basic like starting strength, but where starting strength goes through technique and some linear periodization. Practical programming talks about the levels of athletes, novice, intermediate, advanced, elite, how those programs can change and
Right.
how your training changes, and then the different phases of periodization. Looking at obviously it's they discuss linear mostly, but they go through block and all other types of periodization.
Yeah.
So when I was trying to again, like that was what I was most interested in, right? Was programming. So that was a very influential book in my start. I think I went from there, and then the next book I read was Periodization by Bompa. So that I mean, and obviously practical programming is I would say it's almost like layman's terms. It's simple to understand,
Yeah.
it's simple to read, where periodization gets deep into some science. And again, it's a little bit more dense, still very good, and like obviously everything in there is applicable. But yeah.
But yeah, practical programming is good because it's like when they run out of that linear progression, it's like then what? And that's the book that
Mhm.
that's what that book's for. All right. Well, let's wrap it up. Thanks for listening.
That's the end of season 1, everybody.
Oh yeah, that's right. End of season 1, 10 episodes. Next 10 will be coming soon. See ya.